On Monday, missiles hit an airport in Sana'a. By Friday, Saudi jets were bombing Hodeidah again. 4 years of silence, gone in 1 week. This is the story of how it happened and why it might not stop here. For 4 years, an unofficial truce held between Saudi Arabia and Yemen's Houthi movement. It was never signed, never formal. But it was the longest calm since Riyadh entered this war back in 2015. That calm is now over. Saudi Arabia says it struck the airport to stop an Iranian plane from landing. The Houthis say it was an unprovoked attack. Within days, they fired ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia's Abha airport. The Saudi coalition says it intercepted them. 2 open questions now define this crisis: who fired first, and how far will this go? Subscribe now, because in the next few minutes, this story escalates fast, from an airport strike to a naval blockade, and from a naval blockade to burning oil facilities. Here is how a 4-year silence turned into a war again. This matters because the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is one of the most important choke points on Earth. Every day, tankers carrying oil for the entire world pass through this narrow gap. The Houthis don't need to close it by force. The threat alone raises insurance costs and pushes ships thousands of kilometers out of their way. Riyadh's dilemma is brutal. Saudi Arabia spent the last decade trying to open itself to foreign investment, not fight a war on its own coastline. But a blockade threatens its own oil exports too. Doing nothing looks weak. Escalating risks the war it spent 7 years trying to end. The story doesn't end here, it evolves. Because 2 nights later, Saudi jets answered. Here is what happened in Hodeidah. The story doesn't end here, it evolves. Because 2 nights later, Saudi jets answered. Here is what happened in Hodeidah. Late on a Friday night, Saudi Arabia struck Hodeidah, the Houthis' main port city on the Red Sea. The group's foreign ministry called it the end of what they called a de-escalation phase that had held since 2022. Strikes also hit Cameron Island. At least 1 person was reported injured. The Houthi foreign ministry made their intentions clear. They said, in their words, that Riyadh had made escalation for escalation the defining feature of what comes next. That is not a warning. That is a promise of retaliation. And it did not take long to arrive. This is the pattern to watch. Strike, blockade, strike again. Each side escalating just enough to avoid full-scale war, but never enough to end it. Analysts call it a North Korean playbook: provoke, then negotiate from strength. Whether the Houthis actually want a bigger war or just a bigger payout is still unclear. On Sunday, the Houthis hit back. Missiles and drones struck Saudi Aramco facilities in 2 coastal cities, Jizan and Yanbu. This is the moment the crisis stopped being about Yemen alone. Aramco is the beating heart of the Saudi economy. And now, it is a battlefield. A Houthi military spokesman confirmed the strikes were retaliation for Hodeidah. The message is simple. Every Saudi strike will now be answered against Saudi infrastructure. That turns this from a border skirmish into a direct threat to global oil supply. This is the second open loop from the start of this episode. How far will Saudi Arabia go? Its defense minister has reportedly floated offensive strikes, and multiple officials say Washington has given Riyadh room to act. But the royal court is divided. Not everyone wants this fight. And this fight isn't happening in isolation. It is unfolding inside something much bigger, a wider war between the United States and Iran. That context changes everything. Since February, the United States and Iran have been at war. The Houthis officially stayed out of it. But Gulf and American officials widely believe the group carried out land strikes on Saudi Arabia anyway. Under cover of denial, that suspicion alone was enough to poison the truce. Why does this matter for the Houthis? Because their patron is Iran. As Iran fights for survival against the US and Israel, its allies across the region are being pulled into the same fight. Whether they officially admit it or not, the Houthis calling this an eye for an eye is convenient cover for a much larger alignment. For Saudi Arabia, that means this is no longer a 2-party dispute. Every strike it takes against the Houthis risks being read in Tehran as a strike against an Iranian proxy. And every strike it doesn't take risks looking weak in front of Washington. Riyadh is caught between 2 wars it never wanted to fully join. So where does this go from here? There are 3 realistic paths. 1. A managed de-escalation, where cash and back-channel talks quiet things down the way they have before. 2. A limited war, strikes and counterstrikes that stay below the threshold of full invasion. 3. A full return to 2015, ground offensives and all. The clue may be in history. In 2022, the Houthis offered a ceasefire after a wave of strikes on Saudi oil facilities. Almost the exact same script playing out now. That time, cash and quiet diplomacy won. But this time, there is a bigger war swirling around them. and that changes the incentives. Watch 3 signals in the coming weeks. First, whether tanker traffic through Bab el-Mandeb keeps dropping. Second, whether Saudi Arabia's defense minister moves from considering strikes to ordering them. Third, whether Iran publicly backs the Houthi blockade, because that would confirm this is no longer a local dispute at all. Here is why this matters beyond Yemen and Saudi Arabia. A closed or even threatened Bab el-Mandeb Strait raises insurance costs on a huge share of world oil shipments. That pressure reaches gas pumps and shipping costs far from this region. A regional flashpoint most people have never focused on is now sitting next to a live global war. The story doesn't end here, it evolves, and we'll be tracking every escalation as it happens. If you want to understand how this region reshapes the world economy in real time, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next signal could come any day now.